Welcome to Entrepreneurs Rising. I am your co-host, Carl Taylor, and I am joined by the amazing, impressive Peter Moriarty. Hey, how you doing, Pete?
Hey man, I'm doing awesome. How are you?
I'm doing really great. I'm excited to be here on the show with you today because today we're going to talk about something that we pretty well since the inception of this podcast, we were like, we should do an episode on this. And we've just kind of dragged the chain a little bit and not gotten out and done it. And today we're finally going to start delving into some of the biggest business mistakes we've made. And I'm really excited to hear some of the juicy stories on your side. So let's just dig right in, I guess. Like, firstly, how do you define? I'm curious to know, like, how do you define and decide what is a big business mistake versus a little business mistake?
Yeah, that's a challenge because I think my spiritual belief being that there are no mistakes and everything is perfect, and
Mm.
that every experience that we have is just a stepping stone in the tapestry of our life. Like I find it difficult to identify with the idea of that was a mistake or I regret that. I received a message from a friend this morning, a text message, which is just coincidental, who said, are there any regrets that you have in your life? And that was my response. I find it difficult to identify with the idea of regret if I am to believe that the present moment is perfect and living in the past or living in the future is just going to bring in suffering. So with that said, let's move that bit aside. There are things that I've done in business that have set me back, or maybe set me back. All right, let's take all the woo-woo-ness
Yeah,
out
hold
of
on.
it.
Well, yeah, let's like if we're going to talk woo-woo, it's like, well, no, how could it have set you
Have
back
they
if you're
set me
exactly
back?
where you're supposed to be
There
right
are
now?
things that I've done that at the time I thought, oh shit, I would have preferred not to have done that. And I now realize they're all part of the perfect tapestry of life. But at the time, they were challenging. They were, in my current frame of thinking, missteps. I'm going to be sharing them. What's a big one and what's a
Could
little
could
one?
we could we
I don't
call
know.
them big like learning big lessons? Could that would that help get over the coding of the language of use of
I love it.
mistakes? Because you and I kind of
Our
like
biggest lessons.
the biggest lessons that have come out of 20 years of business on both sides of us effectively. So yeah, all right. So we got little lessons, we got big lessons. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds
All
good.
right, let's go with that. So, how about you kick us off? Let's start with maybe start with one of your more littler lessons that you've learned, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Um, the little lesson that I learned, and I was around 21 or 22 years old, was around, I guess, scoping, but clear communication. I had a client and they were a design agency and they had a lot of files and a lot of data. They were creating digital assets. They were working with Macs, Photoshop files, those kind of things, videos, and they were running out of storage. Now they had a 1 terabyte server at the time. And we worked out that they needed probably about 4 to 6 terabytes of data storage to store their assets as the business was going to continue to grow. And they came to us and they asked for what we thought was a repository to store their data. And so we scoped out a solution. It was a 16-bay hard drive array, so 16 hard drives all put together, and ended up having an effective storage of, I think, 12 to 14 terabytes. The way that those storage arrays work is a couple of them are used for spares, just in case one of the hard drives dies, and there's kind of self-backing up. And the value of that device was probably in the realm of $10,000 to $15,000. It was around that, which was a lot of money for me, being 22 years old, running my business. That was a big job. So we sold it to the customer. We got the proposal signed. We ordered the part from the manufacturer, which, important note, was a specialized device and a specialized part. And we had it delivered and we set it up and we migrated their data and we got it all spun up and we put photos on Facebook of this cool new thing that we'd bought because it was an exciting piece of technology. And after we had shown it to the client and showed them how to use it, and here's all the storage data that you can use, they went to grab one of the hard drives out of the array. They said, "Hey, how do we eject the hard drive?" And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, I want to take it home for the backup. And I said, well, hold on. No. This lives here. It stays here. Each of those hard drives need to talk to each other. You'll lose data if you pull out one of the hard drives. I mean, it'll go to one of the spares. But if you just start yanking out hard drives, then this thing has trouble. And they said, well, how are we going to back up the data and take it off site? And what then dawned on us, on us both, was that they had the expectation that this was a backup device for them to take their data off site. And that's what the 16 drives were for. Rather than creating an array for storage purposes, their belief was, and what they wanted was something for offsite backup.
So each drive would be like a different day's backup or something was in their head of what they thought it would be.
Totally different system. This system couldn't do that. And just a fault and a result of some crossed wires. Now, that was pretty straightforward. They said, okay, this doesn't do what we want it to do. We want a refund. And, it was sad to lose a small amount of profit that we'd made on the deal, but we called the manufacturer and we said, hey, we've got a problem here. We need to refund this unit because it didn't quite exactly do what the customer wanted it to do. And the supplier said, sorry, that's a specialized unit, no refunds. Our business was probably doing about $250,000 a year in revenue at that point. And we would survive from a hit of $15,000, but that would have really hurt us. We definitely didn't have that much cash just sitting in the bank to be able to fund that mistake.
But it's a hardware as well. Like hardware is very low margin, right? So that 15, that's a lot of, it's not like you're swimming in cash.
No,
we
probably made 10% on that. So what we'd have to pay out was, 90% of the value of that, what we'd have to wear as a cost. And we had no one else to sell it to because it was a completely specialized unit. Now, the silver lining of this story is the partner is a husband and wife team running the business. The partner of the managing director of the business, she came to us and she said, hey, look, the solution that we need here is to have the offsite backup. It's very likely that the business is going to continue to grow and we're going to continue to have needs for data storage. So we can probably keep this. And keep in mind, I'm 22 years old. They knew that I was young. I was subleasing an office from them. So it was in everyone's interest that we would keep the peace somehow because we were literally in the same office as them. And so the partner recommended, she said, hey, why don't you fund a couple of 3 terabyte backup drives and you do a free setup of those. And that was going to cost us, I think, about $3,000 or $4,000 for that out of our pocket. And we'll call it a day. We'll call it even. It's a misunderstanding. The scope wasn't completely 100% clear between us. Let's just move on from it. And we took up that deal. And so that was the silver lining. It was like a get out of jail free card when I just could not see another solution. It was just, the solution or any solution was completely blocked. And we got lucky. We just got lucky. And I think what that really, really taught me was being so clear on expectations, being so clear on exactly what somebody wants. With hardware in the IT industry, it's very much a no going back moment. Doing the work up front could have completely avoided that issue that happened later on down the line.
Yeah, like obviously, you know my backstory that I had an IT company just like you, and wow, I mean, you say you got lucky. I don't. It doesn't sound like you got lucky. It sounds like you had great clients. You had good relationships with those clients. Like, let's be honest. I think that's ultimately really what played in your favor there. But I've been in those experiences where, you don't have customers that are quite as forgiving, as nice, as understanding. They're just like, this is how it is. This is what I want. It's funny you share that, and I feel like I've got my own stories to share in a similar vein. I just can't think of the details. I just have vague memories of like, yep, we've had those situations where it's like, oh shit, now we've got to refund this person. But it was never a specialized deal. It obviously doesn't have the same emotional charge to me as that one did for you to create this memory. But I think it's really important, especially if you're in a service business, understanding and ensuring there's clear communication of asking the expectations of what is the client looking for, and is what you're providing an actual fit for their need,
Mm.
right? Like, I mean, that's the core of what a service business is. They provide a need, they explain their need, where you identify it, and then you provide the best solution. But man, I don't envy that situation. That I can imagine it would have been pretty
It was
intense at the
it
time.
was traumatic. It was traumatic, and to the point of sleepless nights, uh, stressing about it. And I think, I've now built a lot more resilience over my career being in business. However, there's still probably a little bit of a trigger there.
Hmm.
If a customer asks for a refund, or we miss a scope on something and we don't get that perfect, then that kind of thing can continue to come up. Would you like to take a turn, Carl, or will I share another
Yeah, no,
question?
I would look. I'd love to share. Uh, it's interesting. Like, before we hit go on this, it was like, what are some of the big lessons or big mistakes? I don't necessarily think of them mistakes, but there's definitely been these little lessons for me along the way that really stand out. And one in particular, kind of in the same vein as scoping, is trusting your gut when you feel like this client or prospect that you're talking to, they're asking you to do something that might be out of the norm, or maybe it's not out of the norm, it's your normal offering, but you just get a feeling, you're like, I really shouldn't take this deal, I shouldn't take this deal, I shouldn't do this. But you're poor, you need cash, you need sales, and so you're like, oh, I just need the client, and you take the client because you need the money, or so you tell yourself. And you're like, I'm going to live to regret this, even if you're not conscious of it, you just feel it. And then, in my experience, 8 or 9 times out of 10, yep, the situation comes up and you're like, oh, this is, and it's not that it's not necessarily that they're bad clients. Like, there's one that comes to mind for me. It was a speaker presenter in the early days of Automation Agency, before we kind of went to the model we have now, and we're a bit more full service, and you got a lot more of me in the process. And just, I remember this particular person really took control. They were very authoritative type of person. And so they really took control of, I want this and this is how I want it, and this. And they weren't overly technical. And so I created this amazing solution, built out this great funnel that would look nice and just should be amazing. I'd recommend this, recommend that. And then they would just ask a million questions extra over and above what the original scope was. It's like, oh, can you just add this? And can you just add this? And can you just add this? And where I was up to at the time, I wasn't really good at maybe setting boundaries around that, to go, well, no, this is, you got to pay more money, you got to pay more money. And, oh, we'll pay half now, and then we'll pay, like, our normal payment terms were like, you either pay all up front, or I think we had a two payment process. But no, they wanted to set their own and negotiate their own. No, we want to do a 6 payment or whatever it was scenario. And so there was just all these signs that was like this, it was a bit of power play maybe, that this guy was wanting to just go, this is how he wants it. And so I took the job. And at first it was like, oh, this is amazing. Because it was a big sale. I've got all this money. This is amazing. I'm so good. So glad. And then maybe a month in, all of a sudden there's like, oh, and what about this? And what about this? No, that's not quite how I was expecting it, because there was probably some scoping problems there, or communication mistakes. And ultimately, over the long term, lifetime value dollars spent with us was a lot of money. It was actually, from a dollars to the business, a lot of money. But if I equate the dollars received to the emotional roller coaster of servicing that client, I would, in a heartbeat, if I had the same situation, say I don't need the money. I only took the money because I needed the money. Where the business was, I think at that time, like, I think we had maybe 10 grand of that left in the bank. And it was kind of like, we need cash, we need to make sales. There's not much in the pipeline right now. And so I took it. And while it got us through the emotional angst, I reckon if I'd said no to that client and just waited a bit longer for the next client that came along, we would have been totally okay. But there were lots of lessons in that. And so the big lesson for me has been, when I feel that feeling, I get that feeling, or if someone comes to me and says, hey, can you do this? And it's outside of the model of how our business is. And I'll be like, this is how we work. This is what we do. This is our process. I'm far more just like, this is the process. This is how we do it. Like, you want 6 payments? Like, I get that. I appreciate that. Our model is we do it this way. and it's easier to do that when you don't need the money. That's the biggest lesson. When you actually don't need the client, when they need you more than you need them, that's when all of a sudden you can actually go, no, this is how I want to do things, and I want to serve you and I want to help you, but at the end of the day, I'm going to make sure that this is a business that serves me too. That was probably one of my biggest lessons. Yeah.
That's definitely a challenge, isn't it? Is balancing, particularly when you're in growth mode. It's kind of like, how many more of these customers do I have to take on that I don't really love and that don't really set my soul on fire to serve, before I can get to a point where I can say, nah, F off anyone that doesn't really fit within who we want to work with. And I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of, no, just to work with people who set your soul on fire and spark joy. That's not the reality. The reality
No.
is, like, you got to eat. And so there's going to be times where you're going to have to take on that client that is maybe not the best client for you to be serving. I will say, though, it gets better as long as you work on your boundaries. And I think it's important to note, Carl, that this client that we're talking about, this fictional character of the client who's not a good fit for you, who's maybe pushing your boundaries, or doesn't quite fit in with the kind of person that you want to serve, they're not a bad person. There's
No, of
absolutely
course
nothing wrong
not.
with them as a person, and they're just living their life and doing their thing. It's got something to do with you and your boundaries, or maybe it's something to do with your traumas or whatever, but it's something in your experience that is experiencing them as uncomfortable. And I think I'm so glad that you mentioned boundaries, because that's the thing that you've got to work on with these situations. And it's like, okay, well, as long as you work on those boundaries, and bit by bit you get better and better and better and better with them, you get to the point of being able to say, no, I'm not going to take on that work. It also happens to be a nice situation where you've got enough income coming in that you can say no to that work. But there's always the adage of, the customer that you say no to clears up the mental space for another customer who's going to be a better fit for you.
Yeah. And it's so true. Like, all of that comes down to, if you've got the strong boundaries, a lot of the time I've found that people will respect it. Obviously, there are some people that it's just in their nature. They prefer to be the one in control. But a lot of the time, like, if someone asks, say, I really want it this way, and you say, look, sorry, the way we do it is this way and this way, a lot of the time they'll go, oh, okay, that's cool. And
there's a great quote I read the other day, and that's that when you set your boundaries and you set them firmly, the people who don't respect them will disappear from your life. They'll just move away from you, because when you set those boundaries, if they are someone who wants to push them, they will self-select out when you assert them.
Very true. Exactly. Like, oh, so that doesn't work for me, and they'll move on. And it is much easier in my experience to do that when it's a prospect, with cash in front of, waving cash in front of you, effectively, not actual cash, but and you're looking at your empty bank balance, and you're going, I need to eat this week. And so you take the job. Whereas when you don't need that, when you're like, well, we're okay, we've got enough clients, we've got profit. Sorry, look, as much as I know you really want it this way, that's just not how we do it. And I think that comes to another boundary I see a lot of service businesses make, and it is one of my other mistakes, is constantly a client asks for something, and you kind of go, oh, you don't normally do it, but because they say, can you do this as well? You go, oh yeah. And you kind of bespoke it, and you go, oh, we'll do this and we'll do this. And look, I'm still guilty of doing that, even at the stage of business I'm in now at times. And I'm not going to say I regret it. I learn from it. And generally, when you kind of realize that the more you keep saying yes, in the early days, let's put it right here. You're in startup mode. You're still trying to figure out product market fit. You're trying to figure out what the market wants. If they ask you for something and you don't currently do it, it might be a good idea to go, yeah, we can do that, because it might be a whole new product line you've never even thought of. But once you've kind of hit a bit of market maturity, or you've started to get your business to a bit more maturity, every time you start customizing, tweaking, a client says, oh, can you do SEO? And you don't normally do SEO. And you're like, oh, I'm just going to go and find myself an SEO person. I'll get them to do the work, and we'll add that in. In my experience, nearly every time we've done that, it ends up turning into more mayhem and nightmare than it's worth. I don't know if you've got your own experience in that.
No, I just can't reiterate that enough, that every single time that I have pushed to accommodate outside our strategy, it's ended in tears. And it's always ended up wasting more time than it was worth, or ending up being refunded. And I think there's a balance that you've got to find as an entrepreneur, because by definition, we see what others don't see if we're starting a business. And we have to have belief in ourselves that others don't have. And in a way, we kind of are creating a future based on a bit of a delusion. And so I think there's a healthy level of delusion for entrepreneurs, but also there's a point where you need to mature and decide, okay, there's an opportunity here for me to indulge in my delusion that this will work with this customer. What data do I have that's telling me this may or may not work? And you may choose to act differently. But it's all part of our lessons and all part of the journey, right? If you take on that customer and you need to learn that lesson one more time, well, it sounds like maybe you needed to learn that lesson one more time. And there's many lessons that I'm still learning, which I love. But sometimes it is just one more time to learn that lesson.
Oh, I 100% agree. And you what comes to mind here too is sometimes some of what I just said, or nearly all of what I said, you could flip that around and say it's not true as well, because there are new product lines and additions to services that we have done. Like even in recent times, we've had clients come to us saying, oh, we really wish you had a project management service. And that's an idea that it wasn't the first time it's ever come, but it's an idea that we've floated around in our background, in our minds and in conversations for years. And we finally had a client who was kind of here saying, I'd pay for it. And I said, oh, I'd only be able to do it if I was charging this price. And they said, okay. And I'll pay 6 months up front. Okay. So we went, you know what? But I set expectations. I said, look, this is not something we normally do. This is a complete beta trial. I'm going to take you on doing this with the full transparency of, at the end of that 6 months, we might say this is not a good fit and we're never doing it again. Or we might go, hey, this has shown us a whole new product line we could offer to all of our clients. And so there are still opportunities in paying attention to what people are asking you for. But I think there is value in understanding what's worth exploring and what's worth not, and and it comes to self-awareness of where you're up to in business, the capacity you have in your team or in your own headspace to be able to spin another plate, as you might want to call it. So yeah, there's definitely still value in it, sometimes going beyond what you currently do. Because if you always stick to what you always do, you're going to get outgrown. You're going to become the Kodak, right? You're going to be out of business before you know it.
Yeah. Speaking of spinning plates, I'm going to segue into when I was spinning the plates of debt. And so this is one of my biggest lessons. And I'm pretty sure, most business owners would have some kind of debt story. Mine was pretty hardcore. I was 23, 24 years old at the time. And I managed to get up to about $350,000 worth of debt. And our revenue at that time was probably $700,000 or $800,000 a year. And so if you think about that, that's not a debt to equity ratio. It's a debt to revenue ratio of nearly 50%. That's a pretty crazy amount. And how that came about, because I think I should probably answer that, was not watching the numbers in the business, and was operating from hope numbers and hope growth. I'll invest in this and hope we get the sales. I'll employ the staff member and hope that things do well. And, hope numbers and hope growth is really funny, because you always see the upside, but you just never see the downside. You never really stop and, look back at the previous quarter and say, oh, hey, how did that go? You just keep hoping and you just keep going. And so what I found was that, that mindset and that mentality, particularly where credit cards get involved, of it's a business expense. They are very dangerous words. When you say it's a business expense and that's what's going to justify me to make the purchasing decision, that's very different to asking, do I really need this right now? And people run into all kinds of problems with credit cards in their personal life, buying stuff that they don't need. I thought I was immune from that because I didn't have a personal credit card, but I had business credit cards, which spiraled out of control. Now, the flip side to that is, okay, the business was growing and we were, quote unquote, investing in growth. But looking back on that now, I don't think that's sustainable growth to take on that much debt, which part of it was actually investing in the growth and part of it was just completely foolish. But I don't think it's actually worthwhile to bring on that much debt. So what I learned from that, and the biggest lessons for me, I mean, it took years to get out of that, years and years and years to get out of that debt. And the business continued growing. So we did need to keep investing in the business. And, some years it grew at nearly 100%. And for a business that's 6 or 7 years old to grow at 100%, which we did, that does require cash and capital to be able to have that happen. But what I really learned was to completely change the approach on how I managed money, how I managed debt. And it's something that I learned from playing a computer game called SimCity when I was a young, early teenager. And well, even before I was a teenager. Now, what I found was every time I played the game and I started with a big pile of cash and I invested in heaps and heaps of assets and then I just hoped that things would work, I always failed. I could never create a profitable city. The game is about building cities. But I found that when I started from a small farm and built that farm to a town, and then built that town to a region, and then built that region to like a city, and then built that city to a metropolis, I was able to keep it in profit as I went along the way. The investment ended up being the same, but I needed the dynamics and the cycles of the income and the outgoings to kind of reach a sync as I was going along that growth journey. And I literally sat down and said, okay, every time I play SimCity, this is how I used to play, and this is how I'm going to play in the business now. And since then, I've literally just taken small steps with all of the investments, with anything that I choose to pay for. And I've made sure that things are always profitable from day one. And then I've just gradually, gently, slowly built on that. And that's been a pretty good strategy for me. It's kind of worked. And I think we've got a whole nother episode in like what I've learned from computer games.
I was just thinking, I was like, there's a whole episode here.
There's a whole episode there. There's a whole episode. But before I get your thoughts, Carl, because I'm really interested in them, the final thing that really came in for me was, being an entrepreneur and being a creative. It's easy to say, I don't like the numbers, or I don't do the numbers, or that's my weak area, right? And yeah, sure, you've admitted your weak area. Awesome, great. Let me give you a reality check. If you're the CEO, you need to understand, you need to know the numbers. End of story. And if you want to continue playing small, that's totally fine. You can give yourself the excuses that you don't do the numbers or you outsource those or whatever. But what I know from my experience is the more I took the financial and the commercial realities of the business seriously, and I seriously upskilled myself, the more successful the business became immediately, and over and over and over and over again, to the point where my best friend in the business is our CFO, because I am obsessive about the numbers and making sure they work. Is that my natural state? No. Should I have been born an accountant in another life? No, it's not my thing. What my thing is growing a successful business. And I've realized that actually being really attuned to the numbers and the capital flows of the business have what's led me to be successful.
I think that's a really important point. I've always kind of thought of well, actually, no, that's a lie. What I was about to say, in my IT business, which I ran with my father, I let him manage all the money, all the numbers stuff. And then when we sold that business and I really was then focusing on my own thing, I really started to make sure I understood. And I always understood the P&L, like Dad and I would go through P&Ls and balance sheets. But I kind of abdicated, I guess, and just kind of go, he's older, he's wiser, he should be managing this stuff. And, I love my dad. He's amazing. Maybe I should have taken a bit more interest and paid a bit more attention. And since doing my own thing, I've from day one have always had very detailed profit and losses, lots of line items. So I can run different reports. I know what it is. I'll do spreadsheets to go, okay, I want to achieve this, work backwards from that. If I want this kind of revenue, I want this kind of profit based on these percentages. What does that mean we need to do here? And I can have fun in the spreadsheet. But if you were, like you said, I would hate to be an accountant. Like that level of detail, like I think that's where a lot of people go, oh, I'm not good with numbers and I'm not good at the detail. I'm not good with those details either. But what I enjoy is I personally really enjoy playing with numbers to go, oh, so if I just change this, it makes this number become like $5 million instead of $500,000? And, it's like, oh, and a lot of it's like unrealistic. We're not going to go from where we are to this point right away, but it juices me up and excites me. So understanding what numbers in your business mean and how one number contributed or connected to another number can equal, the compounding effect, how that could equal. I mean, even recently, every year in Automation Agency, we do a thing where we set critical number for the business. And this year we decided to set two critical numbers. One is our percentage of annual churn, and the other is the average number of new clients that we add every month. They're the critical numbers we're working on. And we've got bonuses attached to those particular numbers. And it's interesting, like running the spreadsheet, we thought we knew which one was going to be the most important number to work on. We thought that would be churn. And when I ran the forecast, though, when I got in, didn't ask my financials person to do it. I got in and played with the spreadsheets, and I ran some of these projections and was like, the profit difference is actually really small when we add just the churn changes. If we do just the average number of new customers, the profit is huge. But here was the real kicker. If we do them both together, it was enormous, the profit difference that this would make. When these two numbers combined, the compound of increasing the number of average new clients with reducing the churn created this huge compounding impact. And I think it's important for business owners to understand what the different numbers in their business mean, how they connect to each other. You don't have to do the spreadsheets like I do. You don't hate to do that. You can outsource all that and they can just give it to you. But I'm reminded of a conversation with a very well-known business expert many years ago, where he asked me, "Oh, do you do a regular profit and loss?" But he wasn't asking from my story is he wasn't asking from a giving advice, but more he was himself looking to understand, like, did you look at a profit and loss? Do you understand what a profit and loss looks like? And the story I took from it was he didn't understand a profit and loss. And I remember being shocked to be like, you're this business expert, and you seem to not actually understand how to read a profit and loss. And I think that's really important that every business owner go through a simple course or something to learn that.
Yeah, I can't wait to record our future episode on wealth dynamics and how different archetypes of business owners, will show up in different ways. And I really like that. For you, it's about like solving the problem and tweaking the numbers and knowing your archetype in the wealth dynamics. I know that I have a similar interest. And I think, for someone who is a more creative entrepreneur who's interested in more creation, numbers don't always feel like creation. They feel, probably more like analysis or more like strategy. But the beauty of how you can apply how you work to the things that you need to do is you can kind of find ways to trick yourself. And we're going to talk about that in the future episode. So look out for the wealth dynamics episode. But you can trick yourself into, okay, well, how can I make this fun for myself based on what I need to get done here? But I think, Carl, we should move on to another story now. Have you got another one that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, look, I've got a little extra story, I guess, that you've reminded me of because of some tech world. And it is a little in line with what we just already talked about before my last story, but it comes to mind. I remember years ago, before voice over IP, making phone calls through the internet was a big thing. I sold this server to a client, and then they said, "Oh, we really need a new phone system." I had never in my life set up a voice over IP system. I went online, I Googled some stuff and saw, you can just download this software that's free. You build it a box and you plug this stuff in. It's super easy. And so I built it and I delivered it to the client, and the client thought it was great. We found a supplier for the cheap phone calls, which they thought was going to be amazing. We showed all the forecasts. You know what we didn't think about? The quality of their internet connection. And we're going back maybe more than 10 years ago now. Wow. So, the quality of the internet was even worse than it is now. I don't even know what the lesson there is. I just reminded of that story. I feel like I needed to share it. There's all of them. just don't get into VoIP is the lesson I took from that. Never do VoIP. And I know that Pete does some VoIP stuff, but like I just
it's a great lesson. Yeah, I've
Pete,
got
you
nothing
go.
else to say about that. uh, I've got another one to share. We had a partnership where someone was referring us clients, and we'd been working together for a number of years, and we'd spent time building the relationship. And I'm very much a person in my psychology that once something's set, I just kind of leave it. I set it up and then it's done. And that's very much a kind of like, creator type mindset. It's like, hey, I created it. It's been created. And forgetting something like maintenance can really allow things to come undone. And so relationship maintenance is an important thing. Of course, in your intimate relationships, but also in, of course, a business sense as well with partnerships. And we'd set up this partnership and everything was going great. And then for a period of months, we just stopped receiving leads or referrals from this person, this partner. And I found it a bit odd. And I jumped on the phone to them and I said, hey, how's it going? Look, we haven't really seen many people come our way for the last few months. And they said, oh, yeah, we're working with someone else now. And I said, well, what do you mean? We had an agreement, we had a deal, we had a partnership in place where you were sending us these customers and we were making really good money from that as well. And they said, no, we've just chosen someone else. And so I asked, well, when were you going to let us know that? And they said, oh, yeah, we probably should have let you know that. And, I think the lesson there was that, I couldn't just rely on someone else in their own reality, managing their own business, doing what was in their best interest for their clients and their business to make that decision. I couldn't expect undeniable loyalty from them forever if I hadn't maintained the relationship. And I hadn't maintained the relationship. I hadn't kept in touch. I hadn't set goals with them. I hadn't, had activity and continued rapport building. And, that's a pretty stark reminder of where your rapport sits with someone, that they will cease doing business with you and start working with someone else, not with any malice, but just because there wasn't actually a relationship there.
They just kind of forgot about you.
Deteriorated through lack of love and affection. The relationship had then deteriorated. And so for me, that really was important for me. It was a good wake-up call on how to do things differently. I'm still not fantastic at the partnerships maintenance side of relationships in business, but I've hired a phenomenal general manager who only cares about that. And it allows me to focus on other areas where I'm really great at. And he's able to do that because it's really good for him. But what's the risk there? Well, the risk is if he was to leave the business and had the relationships with those customers and those partners, there would be a bit of a hole there that's missing. So important lessons for me with that one. And that was a good kick in the nuts and a good lesson when it happened.
That hits home for me. I'm like you, Pete. I'm a great partnership referral partners who send business our way, and I'm not great, and we don't have a great system and process and team member consistently nurturing and maintaining those relationships. So you're right. Like I think that's an important one. Anyone that's got referral relationships, you've got me thinking, going like, oh, we need to really up our game. And that's a good lesson to learn. I think it's a good segue into our next episode, which is going to be on wealth dynamics, on your profile, and how you can use that to your success in business. But Carl, let's wrap this one. I'd love to know from you, the listener, what are your biggest business mistakes? What have been the biggest lessons for you, the things that you've learned along the way? Please go ahead and pop them in the comments, whether you're listening to this or watching it on social or via Libsyn or even on our website. Go ahead and drop us a comment or send us a message. That would be interesting for us to know. And of course, you can access all of our episodes online at rising.show. That's our website, which has everything there. Make sure you're following us on the socials as well. And if you've listened to this and you've got value, we'd really love you going to the trouble of leaving us a review. It's very, very meaningful to us to hear reviews of what you think of the show. So we know that you're listening. If you're enjoying it or what you'd like to hear differently, please let us know. Carl, thank you so much for hosting with me, man. I love spending time with you and I've enjoyed sharing these stories. Thanks for sharing such amazing stories. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Rock and roll. See you later,
Bye.
guys. We'll catch you in the next one.